Welcome back to the channel. My name is Steven. I'm a pharmacist and I own 52 units of real estate. So I want to talk about how I was fired from my first pharmacist job at Walgreens. Yes, one more time. I was fired from my first pharmacist job from Walgreens back in 2013. So for some context, I graduated pharmacy school back in May of 2013. And after you graduate, you're something called a graduate intern because you're not quite licensed yet as a pharmacist. So typically at this moment, a lot of hospital, or if you didn't do a residency, which is usually the route you go into to go to work in a hospital, I didn't do a residency. So by default, if you didn't do a residency, at least in my mind, this was my mindset and obviously a limiting belief, I didn't do it. So I said, okay, well, organically, you're going to work at a retail pharmacy. So think about CVS, think about Walgreens, think about Rite Aid. And I was an intern at Rite Aid for about 2 years. And, they didn't have an opportunity in the Bay Area for me. So, I started looking for, other retailers. So, came across Walgreens. And I remember I met with the regional, I think, director or district manager for an interview. And after the interview, I guess it went good enough. I mean, I remember meeting at like a Starbucks for a very casual, quick interview, and went well enough. And then basically I got offered a position where I was a floater throughout the peninsula. So that's kind of like, if you're from the Bay Area, that's kind of like, Palo Alto, Menlo Park, San Mateo, just kind of that region. So I was a floater. So, I was assigned a store to basically start training as a graduate intern so that when I became licensed and passed my boards, I passed my NAPLEX, which is the national exam. At that moment, you become a licensed pharmacist and you're basically ready to go as a pharmacist. So it's kind of a cheaper way to train somebody because when you're a graduate intern, it's half the pharmacist pay. So let's just say if pharmacist pay was $70 an hour, I was getting paid $35 an hour as a graduate intern pharmacist to undergo my training. So, I remember I underwent the training and it was quite interesting for me. Like, I remember when I did my clinical rotations, not too long before that, I actually really enjoyed the hospital setting. And, I didn't think I was good enough to like apply for a residency. Like, it was weird. Like, I had really low self-esteem most of my life, and I'll do another video talking about it. But I always thought like people were always so much better than me, so I thought I was very average. So because of that, I knew I had to work harder and didn't really aim too high, and it was probably just limiting beliefs, scarcity mindset, and I underestimated myself, right? So came out, worked at Walgreens, and I remember when I showed up, it was in a really rich area in Menlo Park. So you're going to deal with a lot of rich, entitled people, right? That's the downside of working in a richer area. But I remember I was assigned to a store, and when I showed up to that store the first day, I remember my energy just I felt this weird energy, like, from the store. Like, it just felt very, like, there's a big dark cloud hanging over the store. And I didn't know why. I was like, this is a weird feeling. And maybe I just thought, okay, well, maybe I just, it sucks, right? I have to work now. And no more rotations, no more hospital. So it was weird, but, it was probably my subconscious telling me something. But I just felt this weird black cloud, black energy, negative energy overall. So I remember meeting the manager of the store, and once again, I kind of felt this like really weird energy. She was very strict. She was, I think at the time she was an Asian woman. I think she was in her upper 40s to early 50s, I'm guessing. And yeah, she just seemed very like direct and not too friendly, and just kind of this interesting vibe. So I was like, okay, I just kind of ignored these red flags, obviously, between my gut feeling and energy I felt. So I started training there, and then keep in mind, like, to work at like Walgreens or CVS or retail pharmacy, like what you learn in farm school, you don't really apply any of that if you work as a retail pharmacist. When you work as a retail pharmacist, a lot of it's just like, typical pill counting, do consultations on basic drugs like blood pressure medications, cholesterol medications. That's like so basic, right? And you give flu vaccines, and then you have to deal with insurance. And every insurance carrier is different, right? So you have Blue Shield, Blue Cross, Medicare, Medi-Cal. It's all different weird codes. Like insurance cards have like these codes on the back, and you just have to know when you input the insurance, like you have to do it a certain way, right? If there's rejections, you have to deal with like prior authorizations. So I'm like, oh, like that's not why I went to pharmacy school, right? I didn't want to deal with insurance. That's really boring to me. I wanted to do more of the clinical side and help patients. So I remember I would train, and I would take notes in this, like, for some reason I had this like weird notebook that had like parrots on it. I don't know why. Like, I think my parents gave it to me to take notes. So I would take notes, and I remember the technicians would train me. And keep in mind I was like 23 years old at the time when I graduated, because I did an accelerated program. And I remember these training technicians were so like mean, like they weren't friendly at all. And in retrospect, it's because you're feeding off the energy of the higher ups, right? Like they say shit flows down from the top. And I remember thinking to myself, well, if the manager is this way, then obviously everyone else is this way in order to survive in this environment. And I hate to say it, but pharmacy, healthcare, it's predominantly female. And people, like, females tend to have a herd mentality. So like if one sets the culture and the tone, everyone kind of like follows suit, right? And that's just, I think guys follow suit as well, because that's just organizational culture, right? In order to survive, people want to fit in, they don't want to stick out. And for me, my entire life, I've always been like weird. I've been an outlier. I've been eccentric. So for better or worse, that obviously got me fired at Walgreens, fast forward. But also because of my weirdness, my eccentricness, thinking outside the box, it's helped me build a lot of wealth, right? So, but anyways, I remember I was being trained, and they just were really mean. I remember like I just felt very miserable there. And I remember I was filling drugs, and I was given like, 5 drugs to pull drugs off the shelf. And then I remember my trainer, who was a technician, making comments saying, oh, you're really slow. Like, how come you don't know anything? And then I just remember thinking, and I responded like very nicely professional. I'm like, oh, like, hey, I'm new here. I don't know where things are. You've been here a lot longer than me. That's why you're training me. Like, how about you just help me out and like point me in the right direction of where to go? And then she just was like really shocked and really surprised. Like, what the hell is this new guy telling me? Right. But in my mind, I'm like, well, aren't you supposed to help me like succeed? Like, and obviously you've been here longer, so, help me out instead of, putting me down. I'm new. So, that's kind of the mindset I had. And she just was like, what the heck? This guy's actually talking back and probably angry. And this happens a lot because when you're a graduate intern, like I said, I'm making $35 an hour, and these technicians, they're making like $17 an hour. It's like half of what I'm getting paid. So, I get it. There's some angst, there's some jealousy, there's some envy, and like, why am I training this guy? He makes more than me. So I don't know. I felt like there's a little bit of that, reading in between the lines a little bit. So, I remember like just overall, like it was like a pharmacy of like 7, and everyone, like the pharmacists were mean. The manager was mean. The techs were mean. There's like literally one person I remember that was just nice, right? In this whole thing. So, I just remember the trainer was being really mean, and I was just like, man, like it just felt very like toxic and very heavy, and like for some reason my brain just couldn't process things. So they would put me at the front window shift when I was training, and that's the hardest shift because you have to process all the insurance, right? And there's an issue of insurance, you have to call insurance, and then they put you on hold for like 20 minutes. So that's like the kind of the hardest shift in that. So I remember I was getting trained, and once again, like the people are just really mean, like saying like, yeah, you're learning so slow, you're doing this. And I remember my classmate was hired the same region as me, and I remember I would ask her, I'm like, hey, like, do they make you go to the front window? And then she was like, no, not really. And I was like, huh, like, well, then why am I doing the front window? But I didn't really question it. And then I remember asking her, like, because every week, like, I was there for like I think 4 weeks before I got fired. But every week I would get a kind of like a annual or a weekly review. And I remember like with the manager, and every week was like week 1, hey, you suck. Week 2, you suck. Week 3, hey, you're improving. And then week 4, you're fired. Right? I was like, what the heck? I remember thinking like, wait, like you just said I improved, and then the next week I got fired. Like it just was like you're sending me mixed messages, or maybe, they weren't telling me the truth. And but anyways, I was just like, okay, that was really surprising. So I remember just going through the training, and I just would get a lot of like side comments like, oh, like you're not picking up fast, you're not learning well. And I just remember me, like, I think it was hard for me to really learn in that environment because it just felt so very toxic, very heavy, very negative. And like, it just, I don't know, like it was weird. Like it was just this really weird energy of all the employees. Right. And then I remember, so yeah, like I just remember everyone was like super mean and not really helpful. Right. Like it just kind of felt like it was, you just survive yourself and then screw everyone else. Like that was kind of the culture that it was like, hey, I'm just going to do what I do. And everyone else just, you do your own thing, stay in your lane. And if you make a mistake, they'll call you out and all that. So I remember I would juggle everything. And, I didn't think I was slacking. I remember I would do my best at the front register. I would do my best at the cash register. Like I was proactive trying to pick things up. So I remember, I remember like one review with the manager, she was just like, yeah, like if you ever have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask me. And then, so I was like, okay, cool. Like, that's how it should be, as a trainer. Like you should be, receptive to questions. And then I remember I asked, and then one day she just like, I asked her a question and she just straight up yelled at me. And I was like really shocked. I was like, wait, you just told me to like ask you. And then now that I ask you, like you're yelling at me essentially, or being rude or being mean. So, and then after that, she's like, oh, I'm so sorry, Steven. Like it was just stressful. That's why I reacted that way. So I was like, okay, I gave you, one out. But I remember asking the next day again, and I got the same response. And I was just like, okay, like if you told me to ask you for help and you're going to be mean to me and be rude, then I don't want to ask you for help. Right. So, and I remember in one weekly review, I kind of mentioned that. I just was like, hey, like you told me that, and this was in front of the other store manager, like you mentioned that, if I had questions, I'd ask you, but every time I asked you, I felt like you were stressed out and didn't seem to want to help. And then because the store manager was there, she gave a very political answer in front of me, saying, no, like just keep asking for help. But like, to be honest, every time I asked for help, like it was the same response. So, basically it was saying, hey, don't ask me for help. Like she's saying one thing, but her actions were another thing. So, okay, I was like, okay, for me, I'm very direct, and probably what led to me getting chopped off, to be honest. But, I just say it how it is, and like, dude, like, just tell me how to act. Like, just be honest. Like, if you don't want to help me, then just tell me you don't want to help me. But, obviously people don't want to look bad, so they don't say that. So they'd rather do it more passive aggressively. Right. So I remember, kind of going through that experience, and once again, like by week 3, I remember I talked to my classmate, got hired, and like, dude, I knew I'd do more than her, like in those 3 weeks. Like, I was like, okay. And then I remember on the review where it was finally the third one, and like she's like, oh, like you're really improving, you're picking things up. And I was like, okay, sweet. Like, takes me about 2 weeks to get acclimated, and I picked it up over time. And then I remember on the 4th week, I remember I got called in to say, hey, Steven, like, can you come in today and like on this day? And I was just like, oh, well, what time do you want me to be there? And then she was just like, oh, like 10 o'clock. And I was like, oh, do you want me to leave? And then she didn't really answer. So I remember I showed up, and I remember when I clocked in, once again, I clocked in, everyone just like was looking at me because they knew that I was getting my ass fired, right? Probably already, because she probably interviewed all of them, and, they said that I'm like doing shitty or whatever. And, like I said, I'm pretty sure they all hated me, to be honest, and weren't on my side, to be honest. So I remember going in, and I got called into the office, and then it's just like deja vu. Well, fast forward my layoff videos a few years later, but you get called in. I got in, and I saw this like HR representative, and I was just like, oh shit, like, oh god, what's going on? And I remember when I sat down, she was like, oh, like, that the day I was licensed as a pharmacist was like September of 2023. Basically that was the day I got fired from Walgreens. I remember I got sat down and she was just like, yeah, sorry, this isn't working out. We're gonna have to let you go. And then I remember the HR guy was kind of there, and I forgot what he said. I wasn't paying attention because I was just trying to process all this information. And I just remember thinking, like, wait, like, you just told me last week that I was improving. So I'm really surprised to hear this, right? And I remember, and then they just started saying some, like, fluff stuff, but, like, pretty much they couldn't really say what it was. And then I just remember, like, I said, okay. I'm like, well, it is what it is. So, basically got my final paycheck. And then I remember as I was walking out, remember that, like, little notebook I have the parrots and the birds on it? Like, I remember one tech was just like, hey, like, do you want your notebook? And I was like, I remember thinking, I was like, are you kidding me? Like, you're asking me that? But I was like, nah, it's cool, just throw it away. And then she just, like, threw it in the trash can. And then I remember I walked out, and I remember in a weird way, I felt the pressure off my chest just lifted. I just felt like my spirit was lifted the moment I got fired from Walgreens. And looking back, it was because of that, like, environment. I remember I felt this, like, black cloud over it. It was very negative energy, right? And, for me, I was just like, I actually felt relieved because I remember, like, every day that I was there, I remember just driving to work, and I just dreaded driving to work. Like, I didn't want to wake up. I didn't want to go there. It just felt heavy during the commute. Like, when I clocked in, like, I just wasn't happy to be there, and I wasn't happy to see the people. And I just remember, like, being very miserable. I remember I would sit during my lunch break and just be like, what the hell am I doing in my life? Like, this is, like, depressing. Like, this is what my career is going to be like for the rest of my life at 23. And I remember when I got fired, I was just like, I felt a huge sense of relief. It was weird. It was like, whoa, I expect to feel shitty, to feel bad, but I was like, I felt very relieved. And then I remember in that moment, I was, like, just outside the store, before I called my mom to let her know. I remember just thinking, like, wow, like, I was reflecting on my manager. I'm like, dude, she was such a shitty manager. Like, if she could become a manager, I know I could do it, right? I remember just thinking that, like, I could do it if she's that shitty and she's a manager, right? Because, I was very ambitious at the time. And, about my manager, I remember she was, like you said, upper 40s, 50s. She had no family. She was unmarried. She had no kids. I think she lived her job. And I remember I didn't really respect that because I'm very into work-life balance, right? Like, even today, like, I think that there's a way to be good at your job as well as good at your home life, right? And unfortunately, there's a lot of people that they just put all their energy, all their effort into their work life. It's because they're avoiding something else. That's what I've learned as I've gotten older, as I've worked more, right? And so workaholics are hiding from something, right? Whether it's you're hiding from your home life, you're just hiding from something, and you're using work as a shield for that, right? So I remember just seeing that and not really respecting, like, wow, like, I feel like I could be a better manager than you can be, and as well as maintain a better, balance where I'm not hiding from something, right? I remember thinking that, and I was just like, interesting. And I remember reflecting on my district manager who really loved my manager. So they were like buddies, and it looked like my manager was the next to be in line as district manager. So I remember the district manager was the same thing. She was, like, probably in her upper 50s, low 60s, and once again, no family, not married, no kids, and she lived her life again. Her work was her life. And I remember thinking again, like, same thing, district manager, like, she was also kind of, like, mean too. I remember one day she came in to shadow the store, and probably to shadow me to see if they want to fire me or not. But yeah, just same thing, like, just not. I remember asking her for help, and once again, she wasn't really that helpful at all. So I was like, like, I'm noticing a trend here. So, like, the district manager probably trained the manager, and they're both mean. And then the manager trained everyone else in the pharmacy, and that culture of that pharmacy is all mean. So the culture of the pharmacy is very store specific and retail. So if you have, like, a toxic manager, everyone else underneath them is toxic because they want to fit in, right? That's what I learned and realized. So the district manager is toxic, which leads to the managers being toxic, leads to all the employees who are toxic, right? So I remember just thinking like, wow, like this person's not that great. And she's a district manager. Like I can do it. Right. And then let me prove them wrong. So, fast forward to today, I've been a regional director of pharmacy of a hospital at 29 years old. Right. And I led with not fear. I didn't lead with creating a toxic environment. I lead with trying to be helpful. Like, how can I help you do your job to take care of patients? Right. So I have the reverse psychology. I just said, if I want to be a great leader, I just need to do the opposite of these two that I've observed. Right. So, and I've always taken that with me to this day. Right. And I remember after I got fired, like I said, I was in the parking lot of that Walgreens, and I called my mom, and my mom was just like, "Oh shit, Steven, like you're trying to refinance your loans. Like, are you gonna qualify?" And I was like, "Yeah, I think the loan's closed already, so I'm not worried about that." And I remember she was like, "Oh, okay, fine, that's cool. Like, yeah, just find another job." And I was just like, "Okay." And I remember she wasn't that surprised. And then, but in retrospect, I think that was kind of the greatest things that happened to me, because by me getting fired, and going through that experience, it made me realize that I hated retail pharmacy, right? And that's when I started applying to like 100 jobs. I remember the next day I got fired, I literally went on Indeed.com, typed in pharmacist jobs, California. I saw 100 jobs. I applied to all 100 jobs, all in hospitals only, right? So I went pharmacist, California, and all the hospital jobs, I just applied to all of them. 100, I remember I applied to 100. Every day I would look for new jobs that were posted and apply those as well. Because I knew that, you know what? I don't want to do retail. And if I want to work in a hospital about residency, I have to be willing to move to undesirable area, right? So I got interviews in Apple Valley, Eureka, Reading, Bakersfield, King City, which is where I ultimately went. But I just remember going through that, and I was just like, geez, like it fueled me. I was just like, you know what? I want to prove these people wrong, right? I want to prove wrong that I can be successful, that I can be a great leader, right? And I remember I applied to 100 jobs, and about 10 of them gave me interviews, and I finally got one at a hospital that was kind of an hour and a half away from home, and it was Monday through Friday. So I took that job, and ever since then, I was only been in the hospital setting, right? So my first job was a hospital job. My second job was where I did my rotations as a student. And then eventually I went to pharmacy director positions of hospitals, right? And fast forward to today. So, I think that was something that needed to happen to me to make me realize that retail wasn't for me. So I'm glad I got fired. And then it taught me how to be a better leader, because I just said, wait, this person is deemed a district manager, and I think they kind of lack the qualities of a leader. So I embodied the opposite traits, to be honest. And by embodying these opposite traits, I've risen up to be a regional director of pharmacy of a hospital where I oversaw 2 hospitals. So, I want to prove them wrong, and prove that, hey, I'm not a shitty pharmacist, and I want to make you regret letting me go, right? So it was quite interesting for that. And like I said, fast forward, like this 2013 when I got fired. I got laid off in 2020, 2021, and or 2022, sorry. No, 2021. And I just remember thinking like, wow, like things happen for a reason. When one door closes, another door opens. So literally, if you look at my journey, I got fired from retail pharmacy. That was a sign that retail is not for me, and I need to go to hospital setting, which I've been in for the past 11 years, and rose up the ranks to regional director of pharmacy of a hospital. After I got laid off in a hospital position during COVID, I went into real estate and scaled to like 90 units of real estate at one point. Now I have 52 units of real estate after selling some. So that's what I really mean. I'm living proof that if one door closes, another door opens. So it's not happening to me, it's happening for me. So I think in some weird way, I'm not religious, but at all, I'm a little more spiritual, but like the higher power was giving me signals that, Steven, you ignored your gut feeling of Walgreens. You felt a black cloud and you didn't take action. So basically the higher power was like, we're going to get you fired and give you clarity as to what your next journey is and what your path is. So it's weird, right? Like, so in a weird way, I was guided to getting fired to go to hospital, right? Which was the best decision I ever made. And then also fast forward today, hospital pharmacists, we get paid more, right? We're very clinical. So, we actually use what we learn in school. And number three is you're making more impact on patients who are sicker, right? They're in their sickest state. So you can kind of take care of them when they're in their sickest state. Versus now retail pharmacies, they're closing stores, right? And, albeit I've been a part of hospitals that close too. But, it's just more clinical. It's a little more fulfilling. I work more with doctors. I work more with nurses. I don't deal with insurance. So for me, it's much more fulfilling. And the next time the tragedy that happened to me was when I got laid off twice in a year. And that was just a signal to be like, Steven, you know what? You got to have additional streams of income. So that's when I went to real estate. So, things happen for you, not to you. So, like I said, I remember when I got fired from Walgreens, when I stepped out, my chest felt lighter. My weight was lifted off my shoulders. It was really weird. Like I would think that like I would feel really shitty, but I actually felt very liberated and very free after I got fired from Walgreens. So yeah, that's kind of a story of me getting fired at Walgreens at my first pharmacist job. So, once again, it's not about what happens to you, it's how you get back up, right? It's like not how hard you can punch, it's how many times can you get punched and get back up. So I was able to get back up and I was able to rise. So anyways, hopefully you got to learn from some of my pain that I went through and you take some nuggets out of it. But if you want to learn how to buy multifamily real estate with some mentorship, check out the link down below. Otherwise, let me know what questions you have. Let me know what comments you have. And I hope to see you in the next video. Thank you so much.